Morning. Morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Gifford Miller, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the board chair of the Center for an Urban Future, and the chance to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thank you to the many people watching via live stream. The Center for an Urban Future is a think tank focused on creating a stronger and more equitable economy in New York and expanding economic opportunity for all New Yorkers. CUF does an amazing job of raising the visibility of issues, ideas, and opportunities for making our city an even better and fairer place. But most importantly, CUF doesn't just come up with reports that sit on a shelf. We regularly serve as catalysts for new policies and investments. It's why Crain's recently published a cover story about us titled "The Think Tank Quietly Influencing." And it's true, and it's gone back for as long as I can remember. And it's because we don't just have a reflex response to a question. We actually research and let the data and the facts take us to where policies can go to make change. And that sort of seems so obvious, but it's actually a pretty unique approach, you know, and it makes a difference. And our reports highlight all kinds of different issues, and many of them highlight the need to increase city funding on everything from programs that help more CUNY students to succeed in earning credentials to investments that allow the city to better maintain aging infrastructures like our parks, our recreation facilities, and libraries. And these and other vital investments are incredibly important to keeping our city competitive and helping a lot more New Yorkers to get on the path to middle class. But to make all this possible, especially in difficult times, it's important that city leaders also identify opportunities to reduce spending on things that aren't working, to deliver services more efficiently, and, yes, occasionally to increase revenues. So last month, as part of our Middle Class Jobs Project, CUF published a report with 5 concrete ideas to generate new recurring revenue for the city. If you haven't seen it, click on our QR code on your agenda to read it, or check out some of the many articles about our ideas, including one in this week's edition of Curbed. I'm super excited that today's forum will delve into all sorts of fresh ideas that generate new recurring revenues, including the 5 that we've advanced. And we have some amazing speakers to help us think through these new ideas, and I want to thank them for joining us. I want to take a particular moment to thank CUF's amazing staff. You would think, given all the things that come out, that we have hundreds of people somewhere in a dungeon working away, and that is not true. It's like literally like 5 people who do an unbelievable job of turning out content, coming up with ideas, and making them happen. And we can't do any of that. Literally, without our partnership with Winston Fisher and Fisher Brothers. They didn't just make today's event possible. They didn't just support the recent revenue report. They've been partnering with us on the Middle Class Jobs Project, and I think this is our 10th anniversary, right, Winston? 10 years of cooperation, and Winston really is somebody who sees the future and sees possibility, and it's an amazing opportunity for us to work with him. So I'm proud of that work, and I want to turn the forum over now to our amazing Executive Director, Jonathan Bowles. Jonathan.
Thank you. Everybody, Gifford Miller. Good morning, everybody. It's so great to be here. Thanks to Gifford, and a big thank you to Winston and the team at Fisher Brothers. Right now in New York City, we're in one of those difficult times that Gifford mentioned. The city is facing a multi-billion-dollar budget gap that's expected to get even worse next year as the full impact of President Trump's budget takes effect. Given these fiscal realities, Mayor Mamdani will need options for identifying new recurring revenues to sustain core city services and to pay for his bold affordability agenda. The mayor has floated ideas for doing this, but given that his proposals rely on winning approval from Albany, my colleagues and I at the Center for an Urban Future thought the city could benefit from a broader menu of revenue-raising options. The 5 ideas in our report, which again we partnered with Fisher Brothers and with Winston, wouldn't just help the city close its widening budget deficit. They also advance other important policy goals, like funding critical economic mobility programs at CUNY, expanding housing, strengthening the energy grid, and improving parks. Our ideas are, first, unlock more than 80 acres of parking lots and other underutilized land on CUNY campuses around the city for infill housing, generating dedicated recurring revenue to support vital CUNY programs while also adding much-needed housing. Second, generate revenue from autonomous vehicles by establishing impact fees before the market takes off, dedicating a portion of the new revenue to street safety, EV infrastructure, and support for workers impacted by automation. Third, New York will need dozens of new energy storage facilities in the coming decade to meet clean energy goals, to modernize the city's aging electrical system, and to add resiliency to the grid. To ensure New York gets a revenue boost as well, the city should site some of these new battery storage facilities on city property. Fourth, expand paid street parking. By metering just 25% of the free street parking spaces that exist today, the city could generate $1.3 billion annually while improving turnover for local businesses and reducing congestion from cruising. Last, there are surprisingly few restaurants, cafes, and other concessions in our parks across the city, but where they do exist, they invariably enhance the experience of park goers. Creating 20 new destination concessions and expanding sponsorship agreements would generate new funds to support parks maintenance and programming. Now, we know there are a lot of other good revenue-raising ideas out there. Today, we're excited to hear a bunch of them from our panelists, and later on in an extended session where we're going to ask all of you in the audience to share your own ideas for generating new city revenues. But first, we're going to screen a pre-recorded fireside chat that I conducted with someone who's been thinking a whole lot about how to solve the city's fiscal challenges, City Comptroller Mark Levine. Comptroller Levine originally planned to be here in person for our fireside chat, but something unexpectedly came up. He still wanted to share some thoughts, so we pre-recorded this brief video. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Great to see you.
Thank you for joining us, Comptroller. Let's get right into it. You've now been Comptroller for maybe 3.5 months. It's a pretty eventful moment for this job in New York. Let me ask the obvious. How concerned should all of us be with the city's fiscal situation right now?
Actually, I want to be clear that the big picture of our economy may be better than you expect. In a lot of ways, we are healthy. The economy is growing. Our tax receipts are growing. And I think we are the envy of many other cities in the country right now. So it is remarkable that amidst that otherwise healthy economy, we are facing a difficult budget situation, which is surprising and unusual. And I think the reason is that for a number of years now, we've had a structural imbalance building, where very simply, we have been spending more money than we've been bringing in. And it was kind of papered over for the last couple of years, partly because Wall Street kept overperforming and it compensated for fast growth on the expense side. And also there were some budget techniques which I think were somewhat questionable, where we were under projecting known expenses and using one-shot measures to get through the year. And when I got in here as comptroller, I decided to make a pretty strong statement on what we felt was the true size of the gap. And I want to credit the mayor for not ignoring that or even trying to deny it. He embraced it. And so we now have the clearest view yet of our budget challenge, which is real. And the job now in the next few months is to close that gap in a sustainable way.
So let me just go back though. But this is the economy's good, and I appreciate you starting with that. But we've got some challenges when it comes to the budget, and I think I heard you say that in the 12 years you've been in city government, you've never seen a fiscal challenge as big as this one. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. This is the toughest budget we've seen since the financial crisis. The size of the gap, and really the structural mismatch here between what we spend and what we bring in. And even the budget that the mayor proposed, which of course is technically in balance, as it must be. But I say technically because he achieves a balanced budget by drawing down reserves, by burning through prepaid expenses. And while that meets the requirements of the law, it does pass us into the next year with more risk. And there's another factor as well that we identified when we did our own analysis of revenue projections, which is that we come in at about 1.8 billion lower in our projected revenue because we're not quite ready to assume that the boom on Wall Street continues. It's possible that it does, and I certainly hope it does, but we're just a little more cautious there. We just had the best Wall Street bonus season on record, and it's part of why we're going to be able to get through this fiscal year. But I see risk ahead, and I don't want to count on that happening again. So for all those reasons, I am sounding a note of caution right now in the budget process.
Got it. Well, I want to get back to something you said early, which was that you've said that the city is spending far more than it takes in. And I know that in your comments, you have suggested slowing the growth of spending in some areas. But do you also see a need for a boost in revenues?
Well, I think we can probably close the gap with three major fronts. One is getting more help from Albany in the form of equalizing the formulas, which have really penalized New York City, despite the fact that we are an economic engine for the state and send billions more to Albany than we get back. Secondly, we are going to have to push on efficiencies that the mayor's already started a process that will identify 1.5% this year, 2.5% next year. I think that's only going to, I think we're going to have to see that as an opening move on efficiencies and are probably going to have to push farther. And then there's what you referred to, which is bending the curve on some of these very fast growing expenses that we can talk about. The question of raising taxes, either in the form of property taxes or income taxes in Albany. Look, on the property tax front, I think across the board, everyone sees that as a result that we'd rather avoid. And I think that is really got to be the last resort. And in terms of income taxes, look, it's on the table now. It's in the one house budgets for both the Senate and the Assembly. And I think it's definitely worth discussing. And look, on the one hand, I'm very concerned about inequality right now in New York City and society. And I feel that it's getting worse. And I certainly want a progressive tax code to help address that. On the other hand, given that we have a budget that is relying on a thriving financial sector, I want to make sure that we don't undermine that in any moves that we make. So I'm pretty mindful on that and maybe a little more cautious than some other policymakers. And at any rate, I think we can probably pull this off if we get a little more assistance financially from Albany and the efficiency and the savings. That's what I'm pushing for.
Well, that's great. I appreciate you putting it that way. Obviously, there's a lot that we need to count on, right? And whenever Albany's involved, you never quite know. And I guess like the mayor has to, as you said, kind of largely put it that there's kind of these two revenue raising options out there, right? The income tax on the wealthiest New Yorkers and corporations and the property tax. I mean, I'm just curious, like, I mean, you're the comptroller, you've looked at these issues for a lot of time. Are there other options when it comes to boosting new dollars into the city's coffers for revenues? Are there other things that you think that we should be considering as options?
Well, I think that the Center for an Urban Future has put a few on the table that I'm super excited about and happy to talk through them as well. But I know that you have been a leader on the idea of expanding metered parking in New York City, and I certainly do support that as well. So we have better management of curb space and more flow in commercial areas. You probably know this, Jonathan, but there's a surprising number of storefronts that don't have metered parking in front of their store even. And that's like an obvious place to move first because it's good for a cafe to have more flow out front. But even perhaps if you expand a little bit beyond in areas adjacent to commercial streets, it could be good for local business and it could generate revenue. So this is complicated partly because in some versions of it, it would require state regulation, but I'm all for pushing the envelope on that.
Got it. Any of the other ideas I'm curious that we put out, or just others that you might be thinking about? I know that nobody likes to raise revenues or raise revenues on the back of other things, but just curious if you've been thinking about it.
Well, I know you've looked at parks concessions, and I actually used to chair the Parks Committee in the City Council in my first term, and I have found that parks users often welcome concessions because it's a place to get a cold drink or to get a bite to eat. And it can be a win-win because it can also generate some jobs for people in the community and also for this current conversation, give revenue back to the city. And there's an interesting angle here, which is the money generated by park concessions doesn't go to the parks department. It goes to the general coffers. And I've always felt this would be a good way to help boost our parks budget and provide some amenities for parks users. So I'd be all for pushing a little bit farther on concessions for that reason.
That's great. And we're obviously with you on that and appreciate you saying so. Your comments on the current the budget proposals also said there's some storm clouds on the horizon. You alluded to it a couple minutes ago. Obviously, the geopolitical situation, you've got AI, which we don't know exactly how that's going to impact jobs and incomes, federal funding cuts. I mean, I'm just curious, like most of your comments so far have been around this year's budget, but I mean, are things potentially worse on the horizon for the budget? And do we need to be thinking more along the lines of these kind of fees around things that might support specific programs like concessions for parks or kind of tapping revenue for transit. Any other thoughts on that?
Look, I would say we're entering into a period of enormous uncertainty. It's very hard to predict which direction this is going. I think it's going to be a turbulent time, and I can sketch out scenarios where the stock market grows at an unprecedented pace driven by AI. I could also sketch out a scenario where we have a bursting of the AI bubble because the technology doesn't produce the earnings people hoped, and that New York City gets hit really hard by that. I can also, I'm also worried about the future of employment here and elsewhere. And we lost 1 million jobs in deindustrialization in New York City. And honestly, I think we should consider a scale of risk comparable to that right now. And it could happen faster. The 1 million jobs we lost when the factories left, that played out over 3 or 4 decades. And we could be looking at a 3 or 4 year timeline now. And I don't think we've done anything to prepare for that. So that's why I'm looking for a more robust budget. It's why I'm alarmed at the draining of reserves now. To me, this seems like the worst time that you'd want to go forward with no reserves. And I love your idea of creative revenue as well. And look, congestion pricing is a proof of concept here, where we now have a pretty steady stream of funding for mass transit that doesn't depend on whether the stock market is up or down next year. And that gives us more stability and gives a direct benefit in mass transit. And some of the solutions that you guys have been thinking about that are innovative are going to be, I think, probably more insulated from this turbulence ahead. And that's all the more reason to look very closely at them.
And not all of our ideas depend on Albany either. So
amen to that.
Last question, and that we've talked a lot about boosting revenues, but I know you've talked also about where the city can potentially reduce expenses. That's obviously needed too here, given the size of the deficit. What are your ideas on that?
Yeah, so this is tough because every program has an impact, and if you curtail spending, you might limit the programs, and it's a last resort. But I'm afraid that we've got to take a tough look at something like our housing voucher program. It's known by its acronym CityFEPS. It's a wonderful program. It helps families get out of shelter and pay for housing in private buildings. But Jonathan, is growing at 4% a month. And we project it's going to hit over $2.5 billion next year and continue to grow beyond that. It's not sustainable. It's never been budgeted for. And that's an example of something that we're probably going to, I believe we're going to have to contain, or we're just not going to make our budget work. There's also within our schools budget, I think there's other similar questions we have to ask. Schools budget's been growing rapidly. It's now over 36, almost 37 billion. At a time when the enrollment in our schools is dropping, we're down 100,000 students since 2020, we're down 200,000 since 2010, but the budget has continued to go up. What you see now is we have a couple hundred schools in the city that have less than 200 kids, and they still have to have a principal and an assistant principal and a school secretary, et cetera. And so it ends up being very expensive. We're probably going to have to, or I believe we will have to look at combining those schools, which is tough because no one likes to see that happen. But it's just an example of an area that I think we could save money and have to. And I can go on, but there's something called Carter cases in the special ed where kids who can't be served in the public schools, we pay for their private tuition. It's a very important program. It's growing rapidly. It's tripled since 2019. It's going to break $1.5 billion next year. I have ideas on how we could contain that as well. So I think these have to be part of the budget conversation now. I spoke about it last week when I testified in the city council. I want to tell you, Jonathan, I felt it got a more open-minded reception from the council members than I might have expected, which makes me optimistic that we can do some of this tough work.
Well, thank you for your work. Thank you for your thoughtful warnings around this and for all the options you're putting on the table. It's been great talking to you.
I'm grateful to you and the Center for Urban Future for just putting really smart ideas on the table. I devour everything you write. My team does too. Keep the good ideas coming.
We will. Thanks so much.
You got it.
Thank you so much. You should have a name tag there. All right.
Like your suit, very colorful.
Yep. Lisa, good to see you. Thanks for being here. No worries. Well, good morning, everyone. And I'll just actually say a little bit of housekeeping. If folks could just make sure their mics are fairly close to their faces for our online audience. I think we've got a couple hundred people tuned in online as well. We want to make sure they can hear us as well. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eli Dvorkin. I'm the Editorial and Policy Director at the Center for an Urban Future. It's such a pleasure to be joined by this amazing group of panelists today to discuss really one of the most important topics facing the city today and in the future. I'll briefly mention who's up on the stage with me, but I won't give you their whole bios or we'll run out of time. But you can scan that same QR code and read more about our amazing panelists. But I'll just briefly mention who we're joined by today. To my right is Louisa Chafee, Director of the New York City Independent Budget Office, Jessica Walker, President and CEO of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, Andrew Richey, the founder of Civic Hall, Carol Kellerman, former president of the Citizens Budget Commission, and Winston Fisher, partner at Fisher Brothers and the CEO of Area 15, and my favorite title, the co-creator of the Middle Class Jobs Project at the Center for an Urban Future. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Let's just begin with a little bit of context, and then we will dive into ideas all morning long. But I wanted to ask all of you, building off of what the comptroller was saying, you know, we heard a little bit there about the headwinds facing the city, the challenge just of closing the gap this year, but I think most pertinent for this conversation, the out-year gaps that grow to $10 billion or more, you know, starting next year and beyond, depending on revenues, sure, but also the cuts that are coming from Washington, the structural challenges the city's budget faces, the growing commitments that the city's made in terms of recurring spending. So I wanted to ask all of you, just to set the table a little bit, why is it that it's so difficult to pay for new things in New York City when we already have a $127 billion budget? I think a lot of folks, including advocates, don't always understand how that money is allocated today. Where is it going that we're not able to kind of do new initiatives without potentially looking at new revenues? So just briefly, if you could help us understand, where does all that money go?
Oh, I'm supposed to. Oh, I can answer.
Carol, Louise.
Yeah.
We have a couple budget wonks on this panel for a reason, you know.
I am the skunk at the garden party here, where we're all going to talk about wonderful new ideas, and I'm going to be, yeah, but. Where does it go? I mean, that is right. People don't get. We're such a great city. We're the greatest city in the world. A lot of wealth, a lot of prosperity, but the budget is largely allocated to things that you can't get rid of and that grow every year. More than half of it is personnel and their fringe benefits. We spend $15 billion a year just on health care and other fringe benefits for employees. Okay, it's a huge amount. It's bigger than most government budgets in towns across the country. So more than half of it is personnel. The biggest expense in the budget is the school system. And even though the school system is contracting in terms of people, it's still huge. It's almost 1 million kids. And we don't ever take away from things. We only add. Or if we keep things steady, we regard that as terrible, that it didn't increase. So you have fixed costs, plus we're required to put into the pension system, $8 billion, it's 10 now, I think. So you have a lot of fixed costs that use up all of the money that we're spending. And no one wants to take anything away. And adding is very difficult. First of all, we're also very expensive. Anything new requires personnel, requires regulation, requires oversight. So, things are expensive to do here. And I think people don't really understand how big the costs that are built into the budget already are.
May I add to that? Is this on? Hi, this is Louisa. Thank you for having me, and I want to acknowledge Carol, who, in addition to her many other illustrious roles, is also on the advisory committee of the Independent Budget Office. But she forgot debt service. So we also have to pay on our bonds. But there are historical patterns of staff reductions. So PS is the largest cost, but it is not a cost that, it does shift at times. And there are various ways to do that. So I think, while if you look at the overall budget, personnel service is enormous, I think it's important to remember that pensions and debt service and certain other required programs must be paid for. But there is other movement there's other potential movement. They're just really difficult and challenging decisions.
So in this helpful context, I think understanding that there are so many billions of dollars that are kind of locked up every year that can't just be reallocated to new priorities or new needs, no matter how much New Yorkers or policymakers may want, whether it's universal childcare or making buses free, but there's a lot of dollars that are spoken for. I think all of this helps lead us to the situation we're in today. One, where, as the comptroller mentioned, spending has increased faster than revenue, where there's clearly some hard decisions to be made around where that spending goes and how to contain it. But where it seems pretty clear from our perspective, that new revenue is going to have to be part of the equation as well, and that there are structural needs to be able to shore up revenues, especially if we can't rely on, for instance, the projections going forward for Wall Street revenue to be consistent year after year after year, growing year after year after year. So I want to ask you one other kind of key framing question, which is, if you agree that revenue ideas should be on the table, and I hope you do because we're having this conversation, today, I think there's much less consensus in the city around what those ideas should be, clearly. But I want to ask you all, what makes for a good revenue idea?
Well, so I guess when I think about a city versus a company, I look at it as, is there something that's sustainable? Is there something that we can institute that unlocks the potential of the city, is utilizing assets that are underutilized, something that can also be, I say set and forget in a good way, meaning that we don't have to. I would love to see programs that unlock revenue that are not necessarily expanding the size of government, but actually utilizing the assets of government, i.e., build more housing on government land. We've talked about advertising opportunities or sponsorship opportunities. So I personally think a good revenue idea is something that's utilizing the assets but not increasing the size of the government to do it. And there's a lot of that opportunity today. That's obviously my opinion.
I would say also, can you hear me? I don't know. I would say also, always thinking about who is paying which is why we lean in so much to tourism, because obviously we want the money captured from those who visit us as opposed to residents having to pay for everything. So that's something that we would say is an important principle.
I mean, if the question is what is a good revenue idea structurally, Mark alluded to it, because we sometimes think of an idea as, okay, park concessions, for example, there's going to be fees that are going to go into the city's coffers or the park's budget, but there are collateral effects from that decision, which include increased jobs for people in the concessions, better tourism, taxes paid on the food or concessions that are purchased. So there are collateral effects, and we sometimes only think about this in terms of either revenue or savings, but don't actually look at the longer-term implications of an idea. So, everyone has heard about the mayor's idea about free buses. Have we really looked at what kind of economic engine free bus travel would actually generate for the city in terms of speed of transportation, the savings that people have that they spend in other places? It's not just about the lost revenue of people not paying for the bus. There's all kinds of other benefits. So a good revenue idea is one that has collateral effects that are beyond just the simple idea.
So the IBO has done a report on free buses on a pilot. It's a couple years old, but we looked at exactly that. Both what would be the cost to the system, in other words, not collecting fares and additional drivers and additional, or the implications of buses and drivers, but also what's the benefit? Like how many people pay now is also an underlying question. But if many more people are moving around easily, that might unlock other opportunities. Correct. And there are great examples from other cities that have moved towards free bus systems with shifting economic impacts. So that's not in our report, but we're looking at it, the shifting economic impacts in other cities. But we totally agree. You need to look at both what's coming in, but what happens around that.
Well, let me jump back in for a quick second. Just say we just put an $800 million or so spending idea back on the table, but I got to redirect us back to revenue for a second.
Well, wait a second.
And Winston, I see you wanted to jump in. So
That's an expenditure, not a revenue.
let me go to Winston first, and then Andrew.
Well, if there's benefits, though, Carol, if we could look beyond the initial investment, where it generates new forms of revenue beyond what we're just thinking about in terms of its cost initially, I'm just suggesting that there's ways to think about the collateral effects of an idea beyond the individual moment of the idea.
Agreed, and that's true of revenue-raising ideas as well. That it's not just whatever the fee is that you're charging. For example, the collateral, the congestion pricing, as Mark said, the collateral effects in terms of reducing traffic, increased subway participation. So you are right that there are other collateral revenue effects that may come from a new fee or other charge that's imposed that should be considered. But we oftentimes get a little carried away with the projections. And from the CBC point of view, one of the important factors to consider in a revenue-raising idea is that it is going to be recurring. It's not just one flash in the pan and then you don't have it anymore. And that you can really project accurately what you're going to get from the revenue and from these collateral effects.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. That's the seduction of, I do something, it costs me here, but I'm going to get money someplace else. That's just, you can paper anything. You can put something and say, this is what I'm going to get. And there's truth to it sometimes. But I think that it's like trickle down, right? I'm suspecting most people in this room don't subscribe to trickle down economics, yet on paper, it sounds great. So I think I just caution that that's not especially with where we're at right now with the budget, that this idea of knock on, we're going to make it over here, unless you can really back that up with concrete facts, I think you're just fooling yourself. And that can actually create a situation that's even worse. So free buses, there's clearly benefits, but there's also things like decreased subway ridership. That can then hurt. There's so many effects.
It's like
that
SimCity
happen. Right. So I just want us to be, I think you have to look at ideas that are tangible and real. I agree who pays is a big part of it, but we need revenue ideas that are not expanding government today. We need revenue ideas that don't just tax low income or even, frankly, even high income. How do you get the right people paying for the services they're using? we're in a dire situation because it is a hole that's going to keep growing.
So I'd love to ask a little bit about ideas that could actually make some real progress in closing that hole. And I think I do want to come back to this point that Andrew was getting at about investments that can actually spark revenue, because I absolutely agree with the premise, and I also agree, Winston, with your caution. I want to ask you all about that too. But let's just start with the scale of the problem for a minute. We're talking about multi-billion-dollar budget gaps, deficit this year and gaps in out years. What's one idea even that you think is actually at the scale of the problem that does get us? I think one of the pushbacks that we've heard from the administration to date, not just from the Center for Urban Future, but other folks that have been talking about revenue ideas is, well, the hole is so big that we can't fill it any other way besides raising taxes on wealthy New Yorkers and corporate taxes. I'd love to get your thoughts about what are some other bigger ticket ideas that could actually make that dent? Not to exclude the smaller ideas, we're going to get to those too, but I'd love to get your thoughts about some ideas that do reach that scale that we're talking about.
Power and data. That is unlimited demand. There is a ferocious appetite in today's world for power and data. And if you think about what the city is today, it has unused land. That, I think housing is a big part of that too, actually. I think that you could unlock massive economic development with housing development, but power and data is its own category. We have almost unlimited amounts of data, and we are not tapping into that. And that means tapping into it for AI, that means tapping into it for business innovation, that tapping into it for economic development. Power is at a premium. We know what's happening around for data centers. So how is the city leaning deep into what is the actually highest growth sector that we might have ever seen in our lifetime, which is power and data? So that would unlock
So can I
billions.
answer a counter? There are more than one rule protecting the city's data and the numerous data sources that the city has in a way that makes it hard even for city agencies to share data with each other, so that the idea that the city would try and monetize many of the data sources they have is basically legally infeasible. If you think about all the information about what the city collects on humans, it's really hard.
It doesn't have to be on humans.
Okay, I'm just saying, if you're thinking about data sets, part of it are what do people want to do. So I'm just pushing
gonna
back
push
a little
So
bit.
the answer, so if you have a world we live in where probably the most valuable thing today is data, and our answer is we can't do anything about it. So data is not just on humans. Data is on city operations. Data is on mobility. Data is on transportation. Data is on tourism. There's massive amounts of data. Data is us sitting in this room, people listening online. How do we tap into that and monetize that? And if you have to change the laws in the age of AI to sit here and say we have laws, data privacy, yes, but to say that we can't tap into and monetize what could provide billions of reoccurring revenue is shame on us. We do need to start thinking about this, because it could actually unlock massive opportunities for child care for all, housing. You could fund stuff. You have to make some changes, though.
Well,
But that's a big idea.
I think those two things, power, data, belong on the list. We can continue to kind of explore them. But I'd actually like to turn it over back to everybody for other ideas that do get at that scale. Are there other specific ideas that you all are thinking about that could help us start to make some real progress in closing those gaps we're talking about?
Well, I want to build on what Winston's talking about, though, because I think that there is something there. The way I would put it, though, is that's one opportunity, one major asset that the city has, but there are many, many others. And the city chronically underuses, underprices its assets. And I think that that's not a new revenue stream, but it is we're leaving billions probably on the table here. And so my recommendation is that we should think like a business in that, and hire a chief asset officer to look at everything, and to really help the city monetize what we have. I looked. You want to get married in Central Park? The permit is $25.
And the wait list is 7 years.
That sounds like a concession that we can open. So.
At DCAS this month, I thought it was really smart. I got so excited when I saw the press release that they are pushing organizations and companies to use city spaces. So you can host an event at Tweed, $8,500. $8,500, and that includes security, everything for this beautiful space, this beautiful venue. DCAS has leases with 400 real estate properties, 400. They bring in about $47 million a year with all of that. That is one Class A office building in Midtown. So it's just, there's just so much there. It's not a new revenue stream, but there is a lot of untapped money there.
So I want to jump in. So first of all, on data, the city has never done a digital transformation strategy for itself, converting itself from an industrial age city to a digital age city. There's a huge amount of waste in the fact that our hiring practices, our civil service rules, the contracting processes. So there's an opportunity there to look at the efficiencies and operate the way corporations operate today, which is on a digital first basis, and the city's not thinking that way. But Winston mentioned something about property. What do you think the air rights of all of the city's properties are worth? And do people in the audience know what air rights are, which is the latent value or the latent ability to build on top of a piece of property that you own based on what the zoning rules for your given neighborhood are? The normal rule would be to allow you to buy the air rights of the properties next door contiguously, and then you could add it. That's why we have some of these very high towers, because they've collected the air rights of the properties around them. In 1992, the theater owners of Broadway got together and convinced the city that unless they were able to sell their air rights, they would have to sell the theaters. And so they created a special district that allowed the theater owners to basically sell their air rights to developers who then built bigger commercial buildings on the west side of Manhattan in the special district, increasing the tax base and also saving the theaters. The city, if you look at all the city property, the schools, the libraries, and added up all the air rights, just think about the air rights above the New York City Public Library. What are they worth? And imagine if they were used for low-income housing to generate revenue for additional tax base, but do it in a very prescribed and special way with the input of communities, we would unlock billions and billions of dollars. And to Winston's point, there's other uses for that for city-owned property. DCAS has a huge inventory, but it doesn't even know what the value of the city's properties are. And one of the reasons why is because we've never digitized it and created an opportunity to actually analyze it from not just a human eyeball perspective, but from a technological perspective. So part of the solution for the budget of the city of New York is to convert our city not from the industrial age, but to the information age. And that, in 2026, is shocking that we haven't done it. When we call ourselves one of the leading technological cities, our city government is still stuck back in 1990. Mayor Mamdani, unfortunately, is driving a 1998 Pontiac, the same one that Adams had, and the same one that de Blasio had. So it's time.
Is there a model that you have from another city that's doing this in a more advanced, sophisticated way, both of you, Andrew?
For digital transformation, that I know of, no, in the sense that there are, but where the information age is here, so I think it's fair to say the city is definitely, I do agree with Andrew, I think we're very behind, but we're now in the age of AI, and that is actually a new era, right? So and this is actually the year where AI switches from it's coming to mass adoption inside private sector. The end of 26 is going to look radically different than today. Government, there's not a playbook, but the playbook is you have to figure out how you're adopting AI inside the business, because that can increase outcomes. So when we talk about what you can get done with less or how you have better outcomes, that's where AI. What that is revenue, because that's what we're talking about is AI reduces friction. Friction reduces economic growth. So that's an opportunity. The cities have, maybe there are laws, but there are ways to look at our data and say, I can monetize this. I can harness it, get data structure, power, battery storage. That's a huge opportunity. How are our buildings built? So it's fair to say you have to just think differently. It's not about what was the past, it's about what is the future.
So I am very intrigued with or my agency is very intrigued with the use of AI. We've paid a great deal of attention to what the city is considering doing and how the city is moving into this era, and it's slowly. But I think that, for government to be cautious is not unusual. But they are beginning to allow agencies to use AI. There are also some early warning cautions, one of which was flagged at a hearing this week, where a massive mistake happened in benefits calculation by AI, and there was enormous amount of overtime required to fix it. So, it can work well. There are also minute challenges, but you're going to have bumps along the
But
way.
if we're not upskilling our civil servants,
Yeah.
if we're not providing understanding of how these technologies work to our leaders, if there's not a vision for how to actually transform ourselves, then we're going to be still making these kinds of mistakes.
And I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying it's not. Every
Yeah.
change involves bumps.
And most people think about AI as large language models, talking to ChatGPT or Claude or one of them, but it's actually a much larger issue. Use cases for AI are really big, massive data sets. I'll give you an example. The New York City Department of Health collects 10 million pieces of data a month out of the sewer system tracking pathogens. And they have data scientists on staff, they have data architects on staff, and they're using AI now to build a model to see whether they can get a predictive set of data that will give them advance warning of a measles or a COVID outbreak or something else. That's a use case. About a year ago, I met with a bunch of commissioners and asked them how they could imagine using AI in their agency, and the stuff they were thinking about is stuff they could do on their laptops today, not stuff that they need a supercomputer for. So there's a disconnect between what the vision of what AI can do and how the city actually runs. And so there's a huge opportunity to actually build on AI as a partner in identifying savings. And of course, there needs to be guardrails, and there are big concerns. But it isn't just about going to ChatGPT and putting in a bunch of data.
Not AI.
It's not AI. It's really about building, if every agency had a data architect and data scientist, if they actually started developing use cases and partnering with the private sector, partnering with academia. The governor has the Empire AI initiative, which is an academic one. Nonprofit organizations have a huge opportunity to use AI, and most of them still don't even know if they can use it for writing program grants. Just as a quick example of how fast this is moving, so when we got together on the phone and to talk about this panel, I was thinking, well, wait a second. We have 5 of us up here. We have a bunch of ideas. We're going to put up the zoning idea or the data center idea. But New Yorkers have tons of ideas. Why isn't the city asking the city population to help them with ideas? And then I said, maybe I could just build a website to do that. So I went to Claude, I registered budgetideas.nyc, and I basically asked Claude to build a website that allows New Yorkers to post an idea, vote it up or vote it down, comment on it with AI as a moderator to make sure the vitriol isn't there, and allowing you to send it to your friends and build a Wisdom of New Yorkers effort to try to identify sources of revenue. It built it for me in 10 minutes. If you go to budgetideas.nyc right now, you can put up one of your ideas. And so I encourage everybody at home and everybody in the room to try it out. And frankly, Mark Levine or the mayor should actually announce this and make this a crowdsourcing effort, because this problem that we have isn't just one that we have just solved by the people who actually know government or occasionally touch government, but by everybody. And by creating a civic engagement process, we might identify even better ideas and also validate people's beliefs in their city, which is validating them maybe even more important economic engine, because then they have trust and they want to live here because they feel like they're heard. That's actually a collateral benefit that goes beyond the dollars.
Well, Andrew, the only catch I will say is I've already deployed first of all, you want to step on an applause line for Andrew. It's awesome that you're able to do it so quickly. And I really do encourage people to check it out. I was just going to say, unfortunately, I've already, coded a swarm of AI agents to upvote all of Cuff's ideas on the site. So you're going to have to do some moderation to figure that one out. But truly, it's such an exciting example of what you can do to envision something and do it in 10 or 15 minutes. I want to ask.
Could I just get back to the underlying?
I would love that. Carol, you read my mind.
These are, both of you are, big thinkers, and you have big, ambitious ideas about how to completely rethink the way we do things. But in the here and now, I don't think you could take this idea and say, okay, this is $2 billion in 2027, so we've cut the shortfall. You can't quantify immediately how that's going to help us with the budget in the short or even the midterm, which is what the financial plan is, the next 4 or 5 years, where we're showing these $10 billion deficits. So, great, and we should do all of this, but you can't quantify it in a way that we can say, here's a revenue idea that helps us cover our
Yeah, Carol, to your point,
shortfall.
I actually want to bring Louisa back in on exactly this point. So something that we've been putting forward at the center is that not every good idea needs to be $2 billion. You know, I think with the creativity, and we've heard some of those ideas already, but the creativity to be able to identify opportunities to generate revenue that may be targeted towards specific needs. You know, this idea of expanding concessions revenues in parks to fund parks, or building infill housing at CUNY to fund economic mobility programs at CUNY. So I want to start with Louisa, but I'd love everybody's thoughts about this. You know, the IBO has actually for years now put forward very specific revenue-raising ideas for New York City. And I'm tapping you in at this moment to say, not all those ideas are billions of dollars, but there are tens or hundreds of millions of dollars there. Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, Louisa. Is, you know, you can sift through the many, many ideas that IBO's put out. What are your greatest hits? When you think about, you know, all these ideas that haven't yet come to fruition, what do you see as the top contenders?
So you're asking me to pick between my children?
I am,
I
yes.
would say the mayor's favorite is the one he waved around at various press conferences, having us in complete shock that he was looking at an IBO report to increase hiring auditors so as to better collect owed monies to the city. But I'm going to build on something you said, which is that, you know, the challenge is IBO thinks the shortfalls are a little less than the controller, but billions of dollars. There's $500 million, we believe, that needs to be identified by July 1, and for the next fiscal year, about $6 billion, we believe. So 6 or 10, that's immediate immediate need to identify money. And so what we're really interested in is how the city is currently operating and where it can fix what it's currently doing. In the very immediate. And, you know, we have ideas that are incredibly unsexy, but things like freeze spendings on supplies in the last quarter of the year. There is a tendency of city agencies to buy a lot of pencils in the last quarter because you've got extra money. And if you don't buy it, that money goes away, and you can always put the pencils somewhere, and then later you find them. And that's why if you go into city agencies, you will find literally office supplies of a level that make almost no sense in the current era, like fax paper, which has been bought in gross amounts so as to save it, or, you know, spend the money in advance. So we think the city could save $200 million if it just froze the spending on supplies and allowed case-by-case through, because some supplies are critical, but not every pencil needs to be bought on the scale the city agencies are. $200 million is not going to solve the budget problem, but it's more than one. So, you know, that kind of idea. And so IBO is really, you know, we love the big ideas, but we're focused on, or our professional work is focused on thinking about how does this government operate, what is it doing? And what we really believe is that there hasn't been a natural cycle to consider what are agencies achieve outcomes, how are they getting there, are they efficient? And that does involve procurement and personnel and space usage, et cetera, but there's lots of money to be either identified or better outcomes, same money, better outcomes, just by using those skill sets, some of which are fast and some of which will take a little while, but you can identify savings. And we should acknowledge that the mayor has created the Chief Savings Officer program, and they need to put in their reports by, we believe, March 20th, which are intended to save these, or save money in the short term. So, you know, we think that that's also important to address as we look at revenues.
That's great, Louisa. Thank you. Yeah, Carol, so you want to jump in and go for it?
Well, when I was at CBC, I used to have a rule, which I'm sure we violated, and people will find the violations, but the rule was, let's not talk about a new revenue idea or a savings unless it's going to be at least $100 million, because 15 million here, 20 million there, it doesn't add up to enough to make an impact, and the cost of doing it and the downside of every idea having some constituent that doesn't like it or wasn't worth it. So I think, you know, trying to think of things that are, you're not going to find very many that are over $1 billion. I mean, your assessment of your parking fees idea is over $1 billion. I haven't looked to see whether that's I'm just giving you the benefit of the doubt that that's a good estimate. That's great. That's kind of the biggest amount I've seen for a short-term, immediately implementable revenue idea. But I think both on the expense and the revenue side, it's going to take a bunch. I mean, if even $200 million, all you're going to get if you have 4 of them is $1 billion, and we've got 4 or 5 billion that we're trying to deal with. So really the only way is to do savings. We have to look at how we spend, and we're all looking forward to the savings officer's report. But the mayor gave them the charge of looking for ways to cut 1.5%. That's not enough. In the Great Recession, there was an instruction to the agencies to come up with between 3 and 5%. Then you're talking, $3 billion, $4 billion. They can just be ideas. You don't have to do all of them, but even if you do most of them, you're going to save large amounts of money. And it's from the type of things that Louisa's talking about that really the agencies know best how to get those savings.
I want to challenge the framing, though, of not that it's not a good idea to find savings, but the savings aren't just by finding people who audit or chief saving officers, but where can there be transformation of the way the agency runs in order to create savings, not just cutting. So, for example, if the $100 million is the threshold, the city spends almost $1 billion on software and technology projects, and because the contracting process is so hard, instead of going through the city's normal contracting process, they go through what's known as a CDW contract, which is a big federal contract that allows agencies to basically quickly get something done and to pay a vendor, often a consultant that's charging 3 times for their personnel than the city would charge for paying for its own personnel. But the percentage that CDW collects is 8 or 9% on top of the contract, which ultimately comes down to over $100 million of wasted money because of our contracting processes being so antiquated. And that goes to the point is that it would have been great if the mayor had also, in addition to asking for chief saving officers, had created the Office of Digital Transformation or in general, innovation, digital innovation, not just transformation, in order to identify other ways, structural ways, whether it's procurement, hiring practices, civil service rules, et cetera, in order to create less friction, which is what Winston had mentioned earlier, in order to identify savings.
There's a theme that I think you hear a lot, though, is, for me at least, is political will.
Bingo.
I mean, I think that idea of the procurement is great. I mean, that's amazing. $200 million, I think, just by not buying pencils is like
It's
run,
a little
don't.
more than pencils.
Run, don't. I mean,
Fax paper.
run, don't
Why we
walk
buy
for that
pencils?
idea. I mean, that is something,
Chairs.
but like,
We buy chairs.
we have to get to this point where, yes, I think there's probably a lot of $200 million ideas, right, when you get in the weeds, but let's do it. Like, I feel like somebody has to make a decision that, yes, there's going to be $200 million less spending, and agencies are just going to naturally have a budget cut. And if they have to buy pencils, then it means they don't need the money, right? Because they're actually not servicing their constituent or who they're supposed to help. They're legitimately saying, I don't need the money because I'm buying pencils, using that as a proxy. Then cut their budget. They actually don't. That's horrible that there is better uses for that money. We talk about need of people for housing. We talk about need for early childhood care. The needs are endless, and we are wasting money on pencils.
Well,
That's
it's not
criminal.
necessarily wasted. They just
well, it
might
is,
be
but
used in
from
2
where I
years.
sit, I'm sorry, I'm going to be indignant. If there is these needs to help people, because I deeply believe in this idea, I wrote a book about the idea of we need 0 through 5 early childhood care. It's one of the greatest attacks on the working and middle class. If we could solve that problem, what that would do for New York, what it would do for working mothers would be tremendous. And we're debating pencils. And so we should, we should
We've made a
fix
lot
it.
of progress, or the city's made a lot of
But they
progress in
haven't.
the 0 to.
Well, they have made progress. Sorry, that's.
Yeah.
But I think we have to make I would love for everybody to walk out of here with a conviction that tough choices have to be made.
I have another tough choice.
That's it.
This is going to really appeal to a niche. So there are ferries that are subsidized. The ride is tagged to the subway ride, which is a wild subsidy. And so IBO is suggesting that instead of tagging the cost of the ferry to the subway, it should be tagged to the express bus. And in other words, you'd pay like $7 instead of $3. And we think, I've texted the staff to make sure I'm right, but we think it's $76 million immediately. And we believe, based on anecdotal evidence, I see people in the audience saying no way, and they might know because they know the ferries. But the point is that there is money that could be saved there, and many of the ferry riders are people who appear that they could pay either an express bus or a regular subway ride. It wouldn't have the unintended consequence of directly impacting a group of people who would then be obliged to no longer commute effectively.
There's a lot of money in the system today that could be new revenue in this case at $125 billion. We're talking 1.5% when we should probably be talking 10%. And we should be talking about better outcomes. It's not just cut to cut, it's cut to actually get a better outcome. And so I think that there's a lot of money that could actually be reprioritized towards higher and better use with better outcome. The other thing is, I think cutting is something, or reprioritizing spending for the optimization of it should be a massive priority. The other is economic growth. Nothing is better for New York than economic growth. And how do we grow the top line? Because that is actually the greatest way to get out of a budget problem. So we should be at the same time thinking about what are the conditions that we can create quickly for entrepreneurship across all 5 boroughs in every neighborhood. How do we I love that Amex just announced that they're going to be building their headquarters downtown on the port's land, right? That's $5 billion project. JP Morgan's spending money. So it's economic growth at the highest level, and it's economic growth also spread throughout the boroughs. We have to be focused on that because that will help close this budget gap.
Jessica, I want to bring you in on this point. It sounds like it's kind of teeing you up, in fact, because you wrote recently about why a property tax increase, among other things, would be bad for small businesses. And it's really striking when you look at the city's economy right now. Overall net job growth plunged 71% from 2024 to 2025. So, the comptroller is right that there's some fundamentals that still look pretty good, but we have some real warning lights on the horizon. And our economy is slowing down, and job creation is slowing. One area where it strikes all of us at the Center for Urban Future where there's always going to be opportunity to grow the economy, though, is our small businesses and making sure that our commercial corridors are strong, that our small businesses are growing, and the ones that are well positioned to grow have the resource, the ability to grow, add jobs, and that ultimately, as Winston's saying, one of the best ways to raise revenue is to grow the economy, have more revenue that way. But as the comptroller was pointing out, we are so still, after 25 plus years of efforts to diversify the economy, we are still so reliant on those revenues that come from Wall Street. So I wanted to ask you, Jess, if raising property taxes, in your view, is really not the right option, what are some ideas that you think would help to grow the economy in ways that would boost revenues, or other ideas that you think, hey, don't put that one on the table, try these instead?
Oh my gosh, no one ever asked this. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
No, and that's exactly right. That's what it is. So just so you're aware, I think most people know that we are seeing a K-shaped economy. Obviously, larger businesses are doing very well. Wall Street is doing very well, which is good because that's our hometown industry. But small businesses continue to struggle, and in fact, many across the board are less well off than before COVID still. So their recovery is still not there. I guess a few things. One, I just want to make another plea for tourism. And I can go on about this forever, but essentially, when you look at storefronts in Manhattan, we have about 37,000 of them. Almost half of them are new since COVID. Almost half. These are small businesses who are new and still trying to figure it out. So regulations are very hard. Many of them don't have an HR department to figure out how to comply with those laws. That creates a lot of liability and issues. But more than anything, they need customers. And so that's why we work so hard on trying to push tourism. Just a few things there. one, everybody knows this summer we have the FIFA World Cup games, which is a huge economic opportunity. We've known about this since 2022. And the planning just has not been to the level that it could have been. It's a missed opportunity. We will do well, no doubt about it. We're still going to have a lot of visitors here, but that's a missed opportunity. So we need to correct that. We need to have a permanent person held accountable to make sure that the city maximizes those mega events. And I really do like our new the new head of our tourism bureau, essentially Julie Coker, who's wonderful and really has a vision for attracting more mega events like that. But we have to make sure that reaches every borough and that reaches our small businesses as well. I could go on, Eli, but thank you for even asking.
Maybe we do a lightning round of little ideas.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to just get more ideas at this
so
point.
to
Go for it, Andrew.
entrepreneurism. So the New York City school system has, I think, 100,000 less students now than before COVID.
Yeah.
So school buildings have a lot of empty space, and they're in all of our neighborhoods. And if entrepreneurs need space, there may not be a WeWork or an Industrious in their neighborhood. So what if we turn some of the extra space, obviously you have to be careful about who's in the building, but into co-working spaces in neighborhoods and rent out some of the school space in order to increase entrepreneurship and also to generate revenue?
I would go to our public school system at almost every level, maybe not third grade, I don't know, and I would immediately institute prompt engineering classes for every single kid in this city to learn how to use AI to create businesses. That website that Andrew's talking about, you should all be able to do that right now. It is really, that's like saying I don't know how to write at this point. It's that, it's that profound that we need to do it. So if every kid in this city understood how to prompt engineer and understood how to create websites and businesses, you would create a city of opportunity for these children that does not exist today, and you would see massive economic growth. Who better to solve a problem or figure out an opportunity than somebody who lives in that neighborhood? And it's a skill, has to be taught. It's not how do I spell check this, please? It's deep, detailed understanding of how to manipulate AI for an outcome. We should be teaching that every semester to every kid.
I'm looking down the line because I love this idea, and we talked about this earlier, of just putting a few more ideas, concrete ideas on the table without, I will push back ever so slightly on Carol, without having to meet a $100 million threshold, or I really don't want to limit the ideas. I'm interested in the small ones too, the ones that are doable, the ones that are targeted to a specific purpose, but
How
I turn
many
it
of
back
you are
over to all
looking
of you.
both ways when you're crossing the street now because electric bikes and electric scooters are going everywhere? They're motorized vehicles. We should be charging registration fees for motorized vehicles, and DoorDash and Uber should be paying fees for letting those vehicles run around the city making deliveries. We charge people whatever it is for registering your car. Well, we should be charging people for electric vehicles too, at least some reasonable fee. It's going to generate new revenue without creating a huge new bureaucracy.
I would only say about all these ideas. First of all, they should provide recurring revenue, not one time, look at this great thing, but it doesn't help us cover our expenses over time. And that if they're going to be for something that's an add-on to what we already do, that provides something that we want and that's better, it should cover the whole cost. It shouldn't end up being a drag on the budget. So, the concessions idea, great idea, but it should cover the cost of managing the concessions as well, not an add-on, so the Parks Department has to cover a new thing, and this offsets part of it. And that's part of the problem with the smaller amounts, is that they end up not really funding whatever it is that we wanted so much that we said, well, here's a way to pay for it, and then it doesn't pay for it. And that's part of the reason for going with the larger amounts.
I think we talk about it as tax on driverless cars or some sort of fees. I think that is coming. The data is pretty overwhelming about how safe they are. There's obviously some social consequences with that, with job loss, but making sure there's revenue capture right now towards that is something I think you could take that further, because we talk about AI, it's almost a catch-all. Robotics is another massively transformative sector that's coming to the city. So thinking about not a tax to stifle innovation, but thinking about how we do revenue capture around humanoid robotics for janitorial services, humanoid robotics for home health care, and all of those things. It's here. You can buy a robot now to clean your house for $20,000. It's going to go down in price. So robots are here. So we should tax
They're
it.
coming. The challenge is that we don't have the educational, political, social, or cultural institutions capable of dealing with this rate of change, which goes back to the main issue is that we need vision to think about how the city transforms itself in the way at which it actually operates. The operating system of the city needs to actually match the realities of today. There are huge social implications. We're going to go from a 40-hour work week to a 20-hour work week, not like we went from a 16-hour workday to a 40-hour work week in 100 years, from the agricultural age to the industrial age. But from the industrial age to the information age, it's going to happen in 10 years. And there are big societal issues. But if the city government and the people who lead our government don't understand these changes, if they want to implement, for example, the concessions and they're still doing it with pencils, we're not going to find a solution to how to cover that cost. If the city just built a new website for itself, it took them 4 years. It's actually pretty good. It took them 4 years. I mean, think about it. What we need is vision, not just ideas, and we need political will. And that's why I'm encouraging all New Yorkers to demand that this city become a digital city, not because we think digital is better or the AI is better, but because that's the way the world operates. And if this city doesn't operate on the same level as the rest of the world, we will fall behind and we'll always be trying to fill the budget gap. It's time for a visionary change.
I feel like what I can add to the lightning round is so incredibly minute and small, and so I'm tempted not to, but I can't
Louisa,
stop.
I'm here for it, even if
I
maybe
can't
some
stop.
of our panelists may resist. So go for it.
Here's this is a totally different level of thinking, but red light cameras. So the fixed traffic violation cameras, be they red light or speed cameras, are controlled by Albany, and where they are placed is negotiated, and the amount is negotiated. If Albany were to allow New York City to put in more, it would be a revenue generator, and it would allow traffic agents or those in the police department who are working on such issues to be redeployed in other areas. So it is totally not, although
And
it
it
would
saves
generate
lives.
data, it could generate data, which might play into larger ideas, but it is a totally different level of thinking, but it is one we came up with.
The convention center, something else to think about when you talk about what can generate revenue. Our convention center is old. It generates, for all the talk of AI, I'm going to say something also, the future is physical. So this idea that people need to be shared experience in person is actually also another major theme in today's world. So this idea that we have a place for better business tourism would generate a lot of revenue for us quickly. We should think of that as a priority.
I just have to say, Javits has been totally redesigned. I want everyone to know I'm on the board.
Yeah, no, we do great. I don't mean that as a criticism, to be fair. I mean it as opportunity that business conventions are going to have more value for in-person because of this. We're already in the digital age, AI, all these things. So having an ability for us to get more business conventions here, up-to-date facilities, would make us a lot of money.
Lightning round, I completely forgot about this. So my friend Peter Pizer had pointed out to me that the city has a capacity to basically write additional bonding capacity out of Hudson Yards, which it's not using. It could be worth billions. And that model of creating a corporation that actually sells bonds to be able to build that facility could be applied to the Sunnyside project as well. That there's latent, not only is there just air rights or the use of schools or the use of city property better, whatever DCAST is doing, but there's actually latent value in extending the bond market or making the bond market available to New York City property. And that's not something that the city's currently doing.
I want to keep this lightning round going for a few more minutes, but I wanted to build off of those examples as well and say, in addition to revenue ideas, I think ideas for investments that can unlock and generate revenue are welcome and on the table. I was going to bring up Sunnyside Yards to say, look, the mayor didn't go to the president and say we want to do this to generate revenue, right? Talking about adding tens of thousands of units of housing, but undoubtedly it would generate a lot of revenue over time. So I guess I'm curious, and maybe Jess, I'm going to come back to you on this. You have been talking about, well, where else should we be investing, but in ways where the ROI is really good? Obviously, the benefits are multiple, not just revenue, but where would be smart to invest in order to actually boost revenues over time?
Okay, I'm going to get labeled, weddings on the mind. It's not. But I do think New York City could easily, with a little bit of investment, become the top wedding destination of the world. And I'm not being hyperbolic about that. I think what it would take is, we do, I think, about 27,000 weddings. Vegas still does like 100,000 a year. So what it would take is, we need to streamline our permitting process to make it much easier for people to go online, because obviously they're working somewhere else and using websites, and when it's terrible, then they're gonna look at Tuscany, right? And then besides that, then we put in, $7 million. It's not even that much for a huge ROI of doing advertising around the world about what it is, and really set that up. To me, it's a no-brainer. We could easily do that.
I know it's one of the ideas. Housing, I think our land, the city's land. When you look at underutilized assets, you look at NYCHA public space, there's a lot of places where you could have, I think we could supercharge housing development and have, we talk about 100,000. I don't think that's actually a very hard thing to get to if we allow the conditions for building. Building for all levels too, because housing needs to be, nothing will bring down the price of housing like supply. And so how do you make money? That will increase taxes, that will increase jobs, that increase purchasing. I mean, we should figure out how the city, we talk about it endlessly, but how can we actually create high density, in context to neighborhoods, high density development for housing in the next 3 years by unlocking city-owned land, unlocking underutilized public space that's not working. I think that should be, it's almost easy if we have the political will.
Last I checked, there's a pretty intense commitment to build. So I do think there's political will, and I do think the city is in the process of figuring out how to move various levels of government in such a way to move forward quickly. There are many challenges to building rapidly or renovating rapidly in New York City, and the housing market is enormously complicated. But I don't work for the mayor, but there is a lot of movement in the focus of trying to move housing quickly forward.
There is. I appreciate that, right? That we've been doing this now 10 years, we've talked about. So housing is something we've talked about for 10 years. The intention is always there. And I do applaud the mayor. I hope that what comes out of this is actually a system that allows for things to get built that are not necessarily ideologically focused, but really work for basic economics. Because if it doesn't, it won't get built. So we do need to unlock this issue because the system's not working. Because otherwise we wouldn't have a housing crisis.
Well, unfortunately, it not only requires ambition and cutting red tape, et cetera, but I think what many people in the housing industry say is that it requires subsidy. So, that the math does not work on building large-scale, mixed-use housing that's going to provide affordable units, which will be, I'm sure we all agree, a necessity, is going to require government subsidy. So it's not, yes, in the big picture, it's an important policy goal, and it will have economic effects, but it will also, in the short term, require government expenditures. Just saying.
Andrew, can I actually tap you back in for 1 second?
Or do it differently. If I'm just academically speaking, we have a system that has been around for decades, that has affordability requirements, requires massive subsidy for it to be applicable, and where we sit today is with a housing crisis. So that would then logically imply that this system of subsidy and this system that is trying to encourage housing isn't actually working. So do we tinker with the system, Or do we actually think about a way that allows for non-subsidy building, but it changes how things are calculated? If we want 100,000 units, I don't think the answer is to figure out how we subsidize 100,000 units. That's, I actually think, a bad idea. I think we try to figure out a way that we can actually encourage this growth rapidly, because we do need it rapidly, that doesn't require the subsidy. That means changes.
And I was going to bring you back in on the land bank idea, but actually, I want to take it over to our audience for a minute, and then maybe there's an opportunity to kind of come back. I know you mentioned, all the unused air rights. I love the specificity of your idea of an air rights bank. But let me bring it over to our audience. I know folks have probably got a lot cooking in their own minds on this topic. So here's how we want to approach this. We want to turn over to all of you, and all of you that are tuning in online. You can ask your questions there in the chat, and my colleagues will send them to me. You're welcome to ask a question of our panelists, but we also welcome your ideas, and we will collect as many of them as you've got and share them back with this group. But I'd love for you to do two things.
Put it on the website.
Put it on budget ideas at NYC. Though if it's not one of my 5 ideas, I'm going to vote them down. No, we really do welcome your ideas. But please keep your idea to just 1 minute or less. Let us know your name and affiliation. My colleagues will be coming around with microphones. Throw your hands up. I will call on you. We're going to go right to the middle because I see a hand up there first, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sandra Rothbard. I'm an urban planner, and I focus on urban freight. Spent half my career working in New York City government and half as a consultant, so I've got an interesting sort of background there. We talk about expanding metered parking, but no one talks about charging for curb cuts if you have a driveway, a parking garage, any other sort of curb cut. That should also be part of it. You obviously have to pay a fee to get the curb cut in the first place, but that should also be included. E-commerce fees. This is done in Colorado and Minnesota, being looked at in other states. We talk about the impact that FedEx and UPS has on the roads and how difficult that is. That's holding all of our stuff. That's not the private sector. That's all the stuff that we're ordering every day, and we should be paying that because we're actually part of the problem. And then in terms of reducing costs and savings, the city hires consultants like myself for the things that they can do themselves. We spend so much money paying for
3 times.
For lawyers, engineers, planners. We have plenty of expertise, and we do it to CYA, right? To cover your ass, right? And that's the reason why it's done. We have the expertise. We have so many people working for city government, and we should be doing so much more in-house.
Agreed. Completely agreed.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to see just a show of hands so I can help our folks.
Eli on the left
our team
over
come
there.
around. Oh, okay, perfect, right there. And then we have 2 more mics. So we can actually bring one more. Okay, I see your hand in the back there. So my colleague is going to come to you. Go for it. Thank you.
Hi, Jen Vandermeer, Parsons School of Design, New School. I've worked with Norwegian Sovereign Fund for a number of years on some of their investments and startups, and I wonder why we don't take some of these CUF ideas and others and make an NYC wealth fund.
Excellent.
Love it. Thank you. Yes, the microphone's in the back, and then we'll come. Oh, yeah, perfect. Thank you. We'll head to the back first. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the discussion. I just wanted to continue the conversation around metered parking in New York City. The report that you all put out recently estimates starting at $1 billion if we were to grow our program. I think some estimates say we could be going even further than that. We could be talking in the $3-4 billion range. Just 2.5% of parking spaces in New York City are metered. It is a paltry amount. We are leaving so much money on the table. So I want to just re-up the conversation and the question around vision and political will. And in this really serious budget situation where we have a potential for $1-2 billion of revenue for our city, how do we get there? Who do we need to talk to and bring on board? And there's a lot of folks here. We just would love to think about how we move forward on something that I think is a really real opportunity for our city.
So I have a unfortunate consideration. And I should say that I personally no longer have a car, and I love it. And so the street parking is no longer in my life, but it used to be. There is a rule in the city that a fee can only cover the cost of what it is to administer the program. So, which is a way to not put additional fiscal pressure on individuals. However, it means that if you institute a metered program, The collections can only cover the cost of what it costs to operate that program. It cannot make it an additional revenue source unless there's a legislative change. I'm sorry to tell you this.
We can change laws.
You could change laws, but I'm just saying it isn't like an immediate fix.
And why are we just thinking about meter parking? Why not off the alternate side of the street parking? Philadelphia charges $75 for residents to be able to park their cars on the street, and only half of New Yorkers currently use cars. So, Manhattan is like 17%. Obviously, Staten Island is much higher. But we're basically, I hadn't even thought about the curb cuts because the curb cut takes away the space for a meter, and the people aren't paying for that curb cut. So that's actually an excellent idea. But that goes back to political will. If you have to change the law. We have the political will. Let's not let a good crisis go to waste. Let's get the political will organized, and let's get the laws changed so that Louisa doesn't have to say what she just said.
All right, the march starts right after this.
So we're going to keep going to our audience in the room, but I do have a bunch of ideas and questions coming in online. I'm just going to read a couple quickly. New York City has become the dog poop capital of the world. Cameras can capture license plates, so they could capture dog walkers and should be able to issue fines. The germs are a health hazard. I think this is a minimum of $100 million a year in cleaning this up. Jake Murray from OMB asked a question about what are your thoughts on the proposed New York City mansion tax on real property transactions over $5 million? Do you think this would be feasible and a sustainable revenue raiser? And I would just say more broadly, the Mamdani administration's proposed a whole host of relatively smaller tax increases focused mostly on real estate taxes, real property transfer tax being one of them. And then there is a question for the panel about, can the panel address fines? And this is something that the mayor pledged during his campaign. The question is, there are over $1 billion in uncollected penalties. I believe if you include trap moving violations and related car penalties, it increases to $2 billion. While not ongoing revenue, penalties could be updated and scaled by entity size to improve equity. And I think the question is also about how do we collect this money? I don't know if folks want to take briefly any of those on the panel. I was actually thinking, Andrew, about you in terms of, are there opportunities to be better using technology to be able to collect the money that the city's owed?
Sure. I mean, take all the data of all the people that are owe the city money and start using AI to identify exactly where they what other money do they owe, where do they work. There's all kinds of, I mean, I understand there's very big concerns about AI surveillance. I mean, the dog poop thing sounds great, but if everybody knew the cameras were watching everything you do on the street, we'd be living in a dystopian era. The issue is not just bad AI, is how do you build good AI? And the bigger issue is how can the city leverage AI to identify savings in data associated with things that it's not collecting, for example, fines. But there's other places as well. It's really a mindset. It's not a specific use of the AI. It's to Winston's point, is that the entire city needs to be using these technologies in new ways. That includes civil servants and the public itself.
So to touch on that, when we say AI to do things, I agree with you, by the way, there's a real risk of privacy with it. But we talk LLMs, LQMs is what you really want to talk about for city planning, which is actually quantum. Quantum does scenario planning at a pace that we can't even fathom. There are companies now that are actually doing that. So when we talk about how do we model effects of policy changes, how do we model impacts of if you want to do free buses, or how do you look for fraud and capture that stuff, your ability to model that today has radically improved. And that's actually just tapping into what exists. Albany has a supercomputer upstate. It's literally, New York has access to technology.
City should have its own, though.
City should have, that's a different story, I agree with that. But point is, if you have, these are actually very low-hanging fruit things to do about embracing new technology and utilizing it for, scenario planning, tax plan. You talked about hiring more tax collectors, essentially. That's honestly, I agree with getting more. I disagree with hiring. That should be an AI agent. That should be also done with scenario planning with LQM for quantum to figure out. And I realize people are like, what's he talking about? But that's now in here. They're using it. We should be using it. We'll make a lot of money.
If somebody owes the city money, anytime they interact with somewhere in the city, they apply for a permit, they're getting a marriage license, whatever it is, they should be stopped at that moment saying, sorry, you have a debt. You can't actually move forward with the city until you pay the debt in another agency. But these data sets are not talking to each other. Yeah. And that's where I think quantum and AI can help a great deal. But again, back to vision. Nobody actually knows how to implement this stuff because nobody understands these technologies. in the city.
Can I say something about the outstanding uncollected fees and fines? Because I think IBO is part of the problem, and that Gail Brewer asked us to look at it, and we did really methodically. But what we didn't acknowledge in our report is that some of these are uncollectible fees and fines for various reasons. The person is dead, they have moved away, the charge will never be, I mean, there are the person has no, or the person or corporation no longer exists, it simply can't be collected. So the number, I think there needs to be concern. I agree about the collection tools, but there also needs to be a reality that not every fee and fine can be collected. And perhaps there should be analysis that some fees and fines, in fact, are disproportionately impact certain communities and don't make sense. So,
Like small
I
businesses.
don't think anybody disagrees.
that said, I recently learned that Amazon owes the city $10 million in parking violations.
All right, we're going to bring it back out to our audience. We have a microphone here, one on the other side. It was, you see any
boycott
hands on that
Amazon
side of the
until
room?
they pay?
And Eli on the left
Good,
side.
and we're going to come over to this side next.
Hi,
Sir, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robert Stern. I'm with the Morningside Heights Community Coalition. I wanted to get back to the parking permits. I know that Mark Levine, as a council member, had advocated very strongly for residential parking permits. And I only see metered parking as one of your solutions. Why haven't you addressed the residential parking permits, especially since many are coming to the city and parking above 60th Street to avoid congestion pricing? And my second question goes back to air rights. In Morningside Heights, we've had about 1,000 units built over several years, all of them luxury units, all based on the sale of air rights to build tall towers. There has been no trickle-down effect here in Morningside Heights. Why aren't we mandating inclusionary housing in the sale of air rights? That would require the political will to do so, but would really create affordable housing. Right now, all the housing created in my neighborhood is luxury housing. I expect that that would be the case. All over the place, the real estate community will only fund that type of housing.
Right, thank you. I'm going to microphone go right back to my colleague. I'll just say briefly on the parking idea. We do include a parking permit system idea as part of our bigger idea in the 5 revenue raising ideas report. It's a relatively smaller amount of potential revenue than expanding paid metered parking, but it's, I think, an idea worthy of consideration. We do include it in there. I don't know, Andrew, if you want to just briefly talk. This is a good opportunity to talk for 30 seconds more about your air rights bank idea.
Yeah, so first of all, in San Francisco, where there's a housing crisis as well, they have a build. Whether it's luxury or not, you need more supply in order. And an example, by the way, related to that is student housing. There are 45,000 kids that go to college and go to dorms, and they all double up and triple up in apartments, which raises the price of those apartments. And we don't consider student housing low-income housing. It should be considered low-income housing. But to the bigger idea of the air rights, so there's an as of right, and this is where it gets complicated because of the way the laws are written, right? So what you're suggesting is changing the laws. The real estate industry is never going to allow it. You should be able to, as of right, be able to buy the air rights next door and build whatever the law at that moment says. At the moment, that's what it says. I'm not saying that you're wrong conceptually. I'm trying to address what could be done. What I'm trying to say is that there is a precedent already where the city is allowing for air rights to be transferred not next door, but across town. And so if it's mandated that city-owned property, schools, libraries, other property that the city owns, that DCAS manages, if you collected all those air rights and created a bank, and then under special conditions in special districts allowed those air rights to be used for low-income housing, increasing potentially the density of that property, which might make the economics of that property better, you would generate new revenue, generate more housing, and you would do it with the community where they want more low-income housing. But we're not leveraging it because there's not enough density in that neighborhood to build low-income housing. So let's borrow density from another neighborhood where the city owns property and make it available so that can happen. That's the basic idea.
It's a good idea.
The math on housing is really straightforward. I think it's the New York Times. They've done studies. You can look across red states and blue states, and you can look at what is the number one driver of keeping housing affordable. Supply. It's just, I know it's not policies about how you create things affordable. In fact, distortion tends to lead to bad outcomes. So I hear about 1,000 units. What I would like to see is, you think 1,000, why are we not building 5,000? Supply. is the best way to bring down prices. If you look across the country, there are plenty of places right now. You look at Austin, you look at Houston, you look at places where they have massive amounts of supply and prices are dropping, right? It's just, now, we're not those places, so there's a way to adopt it. You have to make sure you do have things for low income, but as you say, then you're getting into subsidy. So now if every property that has transfer requires low income and then there's nobody building it, the consequence of that could be less housing.
But my point is
So
that
you
the
have
air
to be
rights is an
careful,
asset that the city
right.
uses as a subsidy.
I agree with air rights. I think an air right bank, but I'm just saying we, as a city, the best way to combat affordable housing is supply.
Supply,
It's
supply.
just
Build, build,
supply, supply at all levels. And I know that's when we manipulate it, what happens is we have a system of manipulation. And our system of manipulation is why we're having this conversation. And so I'm just looking at it from it's not working. What does work?
You know,
That's your biased interest. Is everyone?
It's not, no, I don't.
well, you know,
I'm
I'm
not-
going to
it's not
jump in.
my-
I'm going to take
sorry,
the moderator's
sorry,
prerogative here and
with
say,
all due
I see
respect,
so
it's
many
not
other
my
hands up,
biased
folks.
interest.
Go.
I mean,
No,
we
it's
could
not
we
my-
could truly
it's
talk
not.
about the economics of housing policy
It's not
all day
biased
long,
interest.
and I'd be interested in that conversation. But
Right.
I want to defer to the fact that we have so many hands up in the room. So microphone is already here. We're going to come around to the second row, and we're going to keep it going. Thank you all.
Hello, my name is Ariel Palitz. I am the former and founding director of the Mayor's Office of Nightlife under de Blasio and Adams. And I just really wanted to propose the idea and really encourage 24-hour thinking around our nighttime economy. I currently do nighttime governance and management strategies and consulting around the world. And the conversation around the world is about 24-hour economy is not just nightlife, but life at night. We talk about FIFA and being able to prepare. Instead of our state allowed 4 a.m. liquor licenses, we now have community boards that are scaling back our city to 12 a.m. and 2 a.m. And it's not just about nightlife and drinking. It's really about thinking about how to activate our public realm, about how to really look beyond all of the quality of life and safety concerns as a restriction, but about proactive management, and also thinking about culture, wellness, retail, our small businesses, for tourism around the world. With FIFA, I mean, some of these games are going to be playing around the clock. How can we think about our city that never sleeps as a 24-hour city, a 24-hour economy, and all of these ideas? This is not just about 9 to 5. This is about the other 9 to 5 and how we can
young people.
Yes,
Attracts young people to the city.
attracts us and
increases the tax base. They get
reactivates-
married.
Yes, get married at 4 a.m.
Put in $25.
Thank you for that, Ariel. Really appreciate it. So I saw that. I think you have a microphone there on the left, and then we're going to go back over to, I saw a hand on the back row. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
You got it.
Yep, you're good.
You good.
Daniela Medeo, Arts Equity Group. We use arts and culture to think about systemic change. And one thing I just want to bring into the room, and I appreciate that you teed it up for me over there a little bit, is that I haven't heard anyone really name explicitly the role that artists play as creative entrepreneurs in this city, who could be working another 12 hours a day and often are working on those schedules because during the day they're doing the great work of serving us coffee and making our restaurants work, right? So what does it mean to actually support and bring arts and creatives and creative entrepreneurs into housing conversations, into the AI conversations, into vacant spaces in schools? And I know, Eli, you do so much great work in thinking about that, but I want to bring that into this space as well. And also think about more cultural assets that the city has. For example, our skyline. What would it mean to license skyline imagery in VR, right? Like that's a licensing fee. And then I also want to uplift Councillor Lincoln Ressler's idea of putting cameras on street sweepers. So we're automatically collecting fines on alternate side parking, which would make our streets cleaner, hopefully deal with the dog poop, and also generate some revenue. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to the back row. We'll take a few more ideas from the audience, and then our panelists can jump in.
Thank you. My name is David Burney. I teach urban planning at Pratt Institute. I'm interested to know what the panel thinks about reinstating the stock transfer tax. It was imposed as a de minimis fee on stock transfers. Collection of the revenue was suspended in 1981. There is legislation pending in Albany now to reinstate the tax. Predictions are that it would generate between $40 and $60 billion a year revenue that can be used for public works, some of the things we've been talking about today, and I'd be interested to know if the panel supports that idea.
So I have an opinion on this. Whoops. It was a tax that made sense when stock transfers were located on the floor with paper, but nowadays technology has changed that, and it would be very easy if to argue that the transfer is occurring somewhere else. I don't know. Austin has built itself a huge trading hub. And so there's concern. The reason it was, is my understanding, the reason it was suspended was that the change in technology meant that collecting it was no longer plausible. And the concern about reinstating it is that it would, in effect, drive certain processes within the Wall Street community that we appreciate being here out of New York City. So I'm not trying to give an opinion. I'm just trying to give the background as to why or IBO's understanding as to why it was suspended and why reinstating it might have some dire unintended consequences.
I would echo that.
Agree.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm going to throw out one more idea from our audience, virtual audience. Tim Tompkins says, why not do what virtually every major tourism destination in the U.S. does, allocate a portion of the room or tourist tax to the New York City Tourism Agency? More tourism promotion generates more visits, and a portion of the proceeds from that sustains our chronically underfunded tourism agency. Jess, I don't know if you wanted to jump in about that, but it's something we've actually, Cup has written about in the past, looking at the impacts of the tourism economy on New York.
Absolutely. Yes, our tourism bureau, they need more money. They need more money to play with, for sure. They are underfunded compared to other cities. And so, yes, I support something like that. But the thing is that our hotels are some of the most expensive already, for a variety of reasons. And so we need to address that before we start making it even more expensive, because there is a point at which people see that and don't want to come. So.
Yeah. That is exactly. I spend a lot of time in the tourism industry, in this case in Las Vegas, because of Area 15. Tourism today is very challenged because of some geopolitical issues taking place, like Canadians are not traveling to the United States the same way. But the cost of coming here is very high, and New York is extremely high. Hotel prices in New York were making it harder to build hotels, and the cost to operate hotels has gone up dramatically. That just translates into people have options. And so what we really need to think about is policies that do make it more affordable, that give more options for people, and that will create more jobs, actually, right? Will drive more tourism. I mean, lowering the cost in this case can actually increase the economic pie.
I mean, Airbnb is essentially banned in New York City. And I'm not saying that Airbnb should be allowed everywhere, but the hotel industry did a really good job making sure that Airbnb couldn't actually allow people to leverage their extra bedroom or their extra apartment, generating more revenue for themselves and dealing with the affordability crisis. This is again like SimCity. You make one move here, it creates another problem here. Yes. It's a real challenge. But I think the point of the fact that less tourists are actually coming to New York because of ICE, because of people not liking the United States, because of the cost of the hotels, the cost of going out to dinner. Anybody go out to dinner in Manhattan lately? It's for two people. It's over $100. You know, so there are a lot of challenges here related to all of these different things. But again, the wisdom of New Yorkers should be collected, because all of these, just think of the ones we just came up with from you today in this room. They all should be examined and looked at, and we should be able to figure out a way to measure them and to determine whether or not, with Carol and Louise's help, whether or not that creates a legal problem, whether it generates more revenue than it does the cost to implement. Whatever those things are, it's time for us to use this moment in history to actually create new sources, not just sources of wealth, but well-being for New York as a whole.
Awesome, Andrew. Thank you. I'm going to go back over to our audience one more time. I see a few more hands up, and we want to get to you.
I have a microphone over
there.
here.
Oh, perfect.
If you
Samara,
can hear
go
me.
for it.
Hi, Samara Karasik with the Hudson Square Bid. Welcome to Hudson Square, everybody. Two things. I just kind of want to bring us back a little bit to government And it's not a revenue stream idea, but Andrew, you pretty eloquently put that we have a major problem, which is we can't hire civil servants that have the skill set that we need. We can't procure technology in real time. So all of these great ideas about how, that would save us so much money. There's a lot of laws that need to be changed to do that. It is not a quick fix. Most of these are not quick fixes. How do we start this process? Because it's not even a 1998 Pontiac. I'd say we're back in the 80s in some ways when you really look at how quickly technology is changing.
You asked the questions, how to start this? I'll give you a quick answer. So the mayor, the controller, public advocate, and the speaker should all join forces to create a commission, a digital transformation commission, that would actually bring in maybe 6 or 7 people from government who actually know the structural challenges that you just described, and 6 or 7 people who have done this in the private sector on a large scale, and actually spend a year or more actually looking at what are the structural reasons that the kind of innovation you're talking about is not happening, and make it non-political and actually spend some time. But right now, the Mayor's Office of Technology and Innovation is actually buried under the Office of Mayor's Office, Deputy Mayor of Operations. It's been relegated to technologies in a corner someplace. It should be attached to the mayor, the OMB, and the first deputy mayor, and driven at the top, not on the side. So, but the problem is that you can't ask the CTO or the CIO themselves to develop a digital transformation. You need the political will, which is why you need all major offices of the city to come together to try to start tackling this problem.
I would actually go, today, I would take every regulation in New York City and I would load it up. And I would ask a very simple question of we talk about supercomputer or quantum, find redundancy. Not political, just find redundancy. And you can do that. What I just described is actually something that you could do today, which would be to literally load up our legal system, essentially, our regulatory system into a computer and just let it, don't give it an outcome, just let it actually find conclusions. That's how it works best. That can have done in 6 months. Forget the enactment of it. That's a different story. But to get information insight, we now are in an age where you can get that information insight that quickly. So I would honestly go, I don't think you need a commission. I love the commission idea, but meaning, let's just start with a. Doge was such a.
The theory was wrong.
Right.
The theory was correct. The actual way they implemented it was wrong.
Right. They did.
I have a much more pragmatic, or I have a different level of thinking. I also think the procurement system is massively ripe for reform. But I think if you look at the current structure within the city government of the Procurement Policy Board, and if you read the rules, there are opportunities for innovative procurements. This is like super bureaucrat speak. But if you go look at it, you can propose a different way to do procurements for a limited period of time, and it needs to be tested. It's a way to think about buying certain classes of commodities like software or IT services differently than what the federal government or the state or the city currently does, which while the supercomputer is probably faster than figuring this out, this one's on the books, and the bureaucrats who do this, like me, understand that speak. So there are two ideas here, both of which might get you there.
My idea, though, is we'll actually give you the idea to put in. Right, what I just said, and I hope, I'm not saying change anything. I'm just saying use technology to literally drive those suggestions that you can enter, because it's actually really hard. I agree with what you're saying. We don't have the compute power. We don't have the bandwidth to really look across government. It's too big. It's too complex. That's the benefit of what we sit in an age where we can use something to help us make a better decision, not supplement it doesn't make the decision, but we should be utilizing that tool. We'll just get better outcomes.
This is my question.
Thanks all. Yep, we've got a couple more minutes, so I want to just get to as many folks as I can.
Yeah, Joshua Sakuti from Assemblymember Stephen Raga's office. I think the place where I see so much waste is in the prison system. So Rikers, MDC, it takes so much money to take the freedoms of somebody. And not only that, we're taking so many people who could potentially work in the city and contribute to the economics of the city away. And so there are many there's a law called the Second Look Act, which would give judges the ability to appeal people, or people that would give it would give them the ability to appeal their sentence if they served 10 years or more, regardless of the crime or the amount of years that they were given. And this would not only, reduce the strain on the prison system, because there's so many people. We have this incredible problem of mass incarceration in this country. So it would reduce the cost of that and also bring a lot of people back into the city who would be able to work. So I think that's just another innovative idea to not only cut down on costs, but also bring people back and work in this great city.
Thank you for that. Hand up at the back. Yep. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
and we'll head to the. Yeah.
My name's Peter Smith. I used to work for the Department of Finance until recently, and private industry before that. One of the things that I'm hearing in the audience and on the panel is ideas are very easy to come by. Executing them within the context of the city is incredibly difficult. However, within the city, there is all the resources that we need to fix that exist. There needs to be a layer in each agency and across those agencies of, I've got to say it, primarily younger people coming up with new skills who are being specifically assigned to work on AI projects, for example, to work on the innovation, because the people who are currently in charge of most of the agencies came up at a different time. Their focus is on keeping those agencies running. We can't ask an agency that is, like Department of Finance, for example, that's responsible for collecting taxes, to also innovate and collect taxes correctly. So the city must find a way, I think, to bring the energy in. It involves artists, it involves parking, it involves procuring new parking meters that can do the things that we're trying to do. That the pressure has to come from above, and the ideas as well. So I wouldn't call it an idea as such. I do have one, which is every time I see an out-of-state license plate parked on the street, my head explodes. And every time I have to put my car in the garage over, because there's a snowstorm coming and I find that the garage is already full, also bothers me. Anyway, my idea is to continue on parking is a huge area where money is just going to rain out of the sky. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. My name is Michael Plottel. I'm an architect. I'm a recovering public architect, having done 30 years in public service in various agencies and authorities. My idea picks up on Louisa, what you said about the PPP rules, which is to look at those rules which are focused towards first cost and first cost only, and to look at them for best value procurement. And specifically, one idea is how would these procurements affect the local workforce instead of like importing a building panel from Canada, which does some benefit to the local economy, hiring local masons, which maybe have a higher first cost, but which has a better multiplier effects across the entire economy. And then the second picks up on the ideas of efficiencies of what we already have. So again, with my limited field of knowledge of design and construction, of enforcing the provisions of our contracts, especially with vendors who are not performing and who know that they don't plan to perform. It's very, very clear, yet there's no political will, or there's no will to really just get what we paid for when we started out the job. Thanks.
In fact, there's a precedent in procurement because human services aren't purchased on price. Yes. So there's a way to thread that needle. Yep.
That's great. Thank you. Do we have a microphone? And went back to this side, and then I think we're almost out of time. Yep. Last question right there. Do you have the microphone? Oh, sorry. There it is. Okay. Last one. Thank you.
Three quick ideas. One is property tax reform that includes a higher tax on non-resident property owners. The second is, and you haven't talked about this, but I think it's important in the context of current politics, is a commuter tax that captures revenue that the city should have. And the third is figuring out a way to market New York City as a university town. We have more higher education students here than Boston has people, and we don't sell ourselves that way.
Yeah, low-income student housing would help with that, Tom, a lot.
Good ideas.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, could we get a great hand for our panel? all the really good ideas out. I'd love to hear more people at least discussing the commuter tax again, which was taken away from us, I don't know, like, what, 15, 20 years ago for I don't know what reason. I know Shelley Silver was involved, but yeah, how did that work out? But anyway, thanks so much for being here. A big thank you to Winston and to his team and everybody we work with at the Fisher Brothers. Yeah, have a great day.
Thank you.